Well, thank you everybody for being here. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everybody to our second session of Navigating Today's Affordable Housing Virtual Series. For those who don't know me, my name is Keith Smith. I am the chair. I have the privilege actually to be the chair of the Regional Housing Partnership. For those who are not familiar with a regional housing partnership, for lack of a better term, what we do is we bring together what I call the four pillars of an affordable housing or a healthy affordable housing system together, which would be the public folks, the nonprofit folks, the private sector folks, and most importantly, the people who we serve. What we basically address is the need for housing production, diversity, accessibility, cost, location of homes, design, which is super critical, and increasing a stability for our region. So at this time, I would like to introduce Stacy Pepia. I should say Dr. Stacy Pepia, who I have the privilege of not only working with regularly, but to call a close friend. So I'm handing it off to you, Stacy. Good luck.
Thank you, Keith. We will have Senator Kane joining us. He's going to be here in a little bit. So let me introduce the session in general. Today's discussion is centered around regional housing strategies. We have two panelists who are joining us today. The first is Laura Lafayette. Laura is, let me get over here to my notes. Laura is the Chief Executive Officer of the Richmond Association of Realtors and the Central Virginia Regional Multiple Listing Service. She also serves as the Executive Director of the Association's nonprofit arm, the Partnership for Housing Affordability. And that is the partnership that is responsible for for overseeing the implementation of the Richmond Regional Housing Framework. And we also have Paul Desjardins. He is the Director of the Department of Community Planning and Services for the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, otherwise known as COG. Paul directs COG's technical and policy work in regional planning and land use, economic analysis and demographic forecasting, public health, foster and child care, and affordable housing and homelessness. COG coordinates the efforts of 24 local jurisdictions in Southern Maryland, Northern Virginia, and the District of Columbia, and other community stakeholders to meet the goals of the Regional Housing Initiative. We also would like to thank today's sponsors. First is Central Virginia Regional Housing, sorry, I'm on the wrong page again. Keith, you screwed me up.
Sorry, I don't do well with scripts, but we try.
There you do. That's okay. Today's sponsors are the Charlottesville Association of Realtors, also known as CAR, and Virginia Housing. Since 1972, Virginia Housing has worked with communities throughout the state to help Virginians attain quality, affordable housing. As we wait for Senator Kane, I would like to invite Chris Thompson, the Director of Strategic Housing for Virginia Housing, to give some brief remarks. Chris?
So, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to address everyone today. We are really excited to be partners here. If you'd like, I can go ahead and actually start my presentation, or if you'd rather wait, I can just kind of follow the agenda and wait for Senator Kane's remarks to wrap up, whatever order you prefer.
Well, I don't believe Senator Kane is with us yet. Is that correct, Gwen?
He'll be on at 12:10.
12:10. So Chris, I think you have some time to go ahead and give some remarks.
Okay, well, tell you what, I will share my screen. I will get started with my presentation and pause whenever we need to. Is that okay?
That sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. So again, per the introduction, I'm with Virginia Housing. Many of you would have known us as Virginia Housing Development Authority. We still go by that name, but we've recently rebranded. So we are Virginia Housing. We've got a new look, new feel. New look and new feel to our logo and our colors, but same organization and same mission. quickly, just to give you a little background, so we've got 3 strategic goals, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in each of those. The first is, we work to address housing needs by partnering with our delivery network. We look to strengthen first-time home ownership throughout Virginia, and that's what a lot of folks really know us through is with our work around mortgage production.
I got you up and running. Is that okay?
Okay, okay.
Yep, there you go. There you go. Yep.
And our last strategic goal is, we work to address unmet rental housing needs. To talk a little bit about, what we've been doing so far. Past year, we've had a really, tremendous year in spite of some of the challenges. Believe it or not, we've identified over 800 organizations that are part of this whole delivery network across the Commonwealth. And this is everything, organizations from Centers for Independent Living, redevelopment housing authorities, nonprofit housing developers, local governments. It really runs the gamut. And our team is actually actively out there reaching out to those organizations, trying to get a handle on, how they're doing, and also looking for feedback in terms of how we can be better partners. One thing I wanted to point out was to help support that network this year. We understand there were a lot of struggles with COVID. We made available $9 million in operation funds that were distributed to various organizations across that network to help them, through some of those tougher times. Also wanted to mention that, per our other strategic goal around home ownership, demand continues to be strong. These numbers are for the fiscal year, so ending in July or June of 2020. During that year, we originated or purchased over 8,500 loans, and we know affordability is a critical issue for just about all of our families. And so with that, for those who received a loan through Virginia Housing, you see over 90% received some sort of assistance through down payment or closing costs, and that translated into roughly 17 million that we made available through our what we call our REACH resources. Another thing we're really proud of is it's not just about, preparing people to become homeowners, but it's also, making sure they understand that the long haul commitment and keeping them in those homes. We also had a record year last year in terms of the number of people who went through our homeownership education, which was just over 19,000. And the last one I want to tie to our meeting the unmet rental needs. We had a record year last year where we provided over 800 million in financing, helping to fund just about 5,500 new rental units across the Commonwealth. And that's serving a variety of income needs, everything from extremely low income, where you're looking at permanent supportive housing at 30% or less AMI, all the way up to we can fund market rate at 120% or even above. So we're really put a high value on mixed income through our financing mechanism. Looking ahead, some of the priorities that we have moving forward, we just took our strategic plan to the board, and there are 2 strategic objectives I wanted to pull out to talk about in terms of intensity for next year. Public housing revitalization. We've been working really closely with the PHA network to understand their capital needs, and are positioning ourselves to continue to support that work, not only in helping with financing, but also with the organizational capacity of our housing authorities. And so we will be working with them on both organizational development as well as financial ability. And then for home ownership.
Hey, Chris, I'm going to
Yes.
take a little bit of chairman's prerogative here. Looks like Senator Kane just joined us, and we want to be a little bit thoughtful of his time. So
Yep.
Stacy, if you would like to introduce the senator so he can make his remarks and get on with his very busy day.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator, for being with us today. Senator Kane is no stranger to the issues surrounding affordable housing and social equity in Virginia. Early in his career as a practicing lawyer in Virginia, He specialized in the representation of people who had been denied housing due to their race, disability, or familiar status. And for nearly 2 decades, Senator Kane has worked tirelessly to serve Virginia in elected office, serving as the 38th Lieutenant Governor of Virginia from 2002 until 2006, and as the 70th Governor of the state of Virginia from 2006 until 2010, before being elected to the U.S. Senate in 2012. Senator, thank you for joining us today, and the floor is now yours.
Well, Stacy, thank you. And to everybody with the Central Virginia Regional Housing Partnership, I really appreciate the opportunity to join you. Chris, thanks for letting Keith use a chairman's prerogative to jump me in. We have a vote that starts shortly after I'm going to finish. And so I am glad I could just join you and tell you how important your work is. You've got great panelists. I see Laura Lafayette with you. I've known Laura for many years. She's forgotten more about housing than I've ever known. So she'll, I know, be a great part of the discussion today. You know, what I thought I really would do is just go right to it. Stacy told you my background as a private attorney was largely in the housing area, the fair housing law, and I'm still very, very passionate advocate of that law and have a proposal that is in the Senate that I'm pushing and that is getting a little bit more momentum every day to include in the fair housing law a bar on any discrimination based on source of income, which I think would be really helpful to low and moderate income families. And I think that I have some prospects maybe in the next Senate of the United States to get that done. So it's an issue that was important to me in my early law practice, but then obviously as a local official in Richmond, working significantly on housing policy issues, whether it was with the housing authority or tax abatement strategies so that people could renovate homes without incurring a huge additional tax burden. And that became a way that we were able to take a lot of vacant properties and return them to housing that could be accessed by people of all incomes. So this is an issue that's very close to me. But what I really want to talk about is the challenges that you're facing right now. We're all facing because of COVID. I worked real hard on the CARES Act when we passed it in March, and that had some positive assistance for renters or homeowners if they rent or own in a property that's financed federally. So we had to kind of have a federal nexus to stop evictions in federally connected properties or stop foreclosures. And a number of states have, done their own actions, including Governor Northam and the Virginia Supreme Court, to try to slow or stop evictions and foreclosures in this really challenging time. But it's not enough. It's important that we do it. But the problem is when you stop evictions or stop foreclosures at a time when people aren't able to pay the rent, for example, then the owners of the properties without an income source are not able to maintain the properties in the way that they should, in the way that we would want them to. Those owners often have their own, debt that they're paying off to support the properties that they own. And if they don't have income and they're not able to do it, then that jeopardizes them. And so what we really need, and this is what we're here for this week, we're in the Senate this week, in my view, rushing a Supreme Court nomination that we should wait on until after the election, and continuing to delay action on a fifth COVID bill, a key to which has to be support for people facing problems with eviction or foreclosure. We've got to provide rent and mortgage support in the next COVID bill. We voted in the Senate yesterday on a Republican proposal that we had previously voted down. And one of the reasons we voted it down is it had no assistance for rent, no assistance for mortgage, no food benefits or SNAP benefits, no assistance for state and local governments who are seeing their revenues decline in this very challenging time. But I am trying with my colleagues in the Senate to keep the housing needs front and center. In the Thomas Jefferson Planning District, you've got all kinds of challenges about affordable housing under normal pre-COVID times. It's an area that has had some real success economically, but then that's led to housing costs being, significant and putting affordable housing out of the reach of many. And this partnership has worked on innovative strategies to try to provide more housing, workforce housing and housing for people of modest means. And that's really important. But COVID has just added this extra element onto it. The statistics are pretty grim, and I suspect that you probably, already talked about them, but there's about 8 million households that could face eviction in January. This is nationally, with a back due rent that's now totaled to more than $30 billion. About 15% of renters nationwide are not cut up on rent right now, and the levels are higher if you look at minority populations, and that's sadly not surprising. Who's getting coronavirus? Predominantly African Americans and Latinos. Who's dying of coronavirus? Primarily African Americans, disproportionately. Who's losing their jobs to coronavirus? Primarily African Americans, Latinos, women, young people, people on the lower end of the salary scale. And that obviously has significant effect on housing. Virginia has been able to use the CARES Act money, thank goodness, and local relief funding to launch rent and mortgage relief program. And I praise the state's leaders for taking some of the CARES Act dollars that we allocated and using them in that way. And I know not just Virginia, but local governments are doing the same thing. A number of localities are using CARES Act funds in the same way. But we have to, absolutely have to, in the next COVID bill, provide significant housing relief. And I'm not going to vote for a bill that doesn't have that. So now, good news is this. I wish we had gotten a fifth bill before now. When the House passed one in May, I knew that the Senate wouldn't a Republican Senate wasn't going to embrace the Democratic House's bill. That wasn't going to happen. But I thought the Republican Senate would put their own proposal on the table, and then we would narrow the difference. But we went through May and then June and then July and then August without even a proposal on the table. And it wasn't until late September that the Senate GOP put a proposal on the table that not all the GOP was willing to support. When we voted it down, we hoped that would inspire negotiations for the next bill. And we were half right on that. It did inspire negotiations between the Democrats and the White House, but the Senate majority, as has been widely reported in the last couple of weeks, is basically saying we don't want to do a bill until after the election. So what are my hopes? I actually believe that whoever wins the presidency on November 3rd will do another sizable stimulus coronavirus relief package in November or December. Why do I believe that? Well, first, if President Trump were to win, he would not want an inauguration day in late January being like FDR's inauguration in 1933 with the bottom falling out of everything. He's going to want to have some uplift to be able to talk about in late January. And so I think the White House will be very engaged should President Trump be successful in trying to get another stimulus bill done in November or December. I feel not quite as confident, but still fairly confident that if Joe Biden wins the White House, there will also be momentum to do something in November or December. Republicans, knowing that President Trump is on his way out of office, they're not going to be too worried with, well, what is the White House saying about this? And enough Republicans are hearing from their own constituents that there is a need to do something and do something big. Among the 53 Republicans, we've got about 20 who don't want to do anything for deficit reasons. That's their asserted rationale. But that means there are 30 to 33 who do want to do something. And increasingly, it looks like that's big. And so I think if Joe wins on November 3rd, the Republicans in the Senate are less worried about what the White House thinks about it, and they're thinking about their own states and their own elections in 2022 and beyond. And so I think we can make something happen. I will say there is a little bit of a conventional wisdom that doesn't make me happy, that says that if Joe Biden wins, that the Republicans will just decide to stonewall everything. President Trump won't want to sign a bill, et cetera. But if that's the case, that would be unfortunate because it would occasion more delay at a time when people are really stressed. But it would probably lead to even a bigger stimulus bill in January and February than the one that we might get in November or December. So we should have gotten a fifth bill before now. I praise all my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate, Congress and White House for the first four bills in March and April, because these were big, sizable, expensive bills, and everybody worked hard on them. We should have had a fifth bill before now. We haven't. It's my hope we'll get one in November and December, and I'm going to make absolutely sure. And even if I didn't, I have other colleagues who are singing from the same songbook as me. I make absolutely sure that this is a bill that includes significant housing aid. For me, the core of the next bill should be the suffering of individuals and families, and housing and food and some continued unemployment assistance have to be the base of it. We'll do things for small businesses, including the nonprofits that are doing such good work right now. That PPP program in the CARES Act was really important. I suspect some of your organizations, probably benefited from that. And that's great. You should, because you're doing good work right now. We refilled the PPP bucket at the end of April with more funding, and more is needed still. But I still believe that the heart of this next bill needs to be just the suffering of individuals and families. And in that, housing, food, employment support, those are the keys. So thank you for doing what you're doing. When we get beyond COVID, issues like my fair housing bill to add source of income as a protected class, my work with Senator Cantwell to dramatically expand the low-income tax credit program, which I view as having been such a successful one. We don't have to invent new programs. Sometimes the right thing to do is take a program that works and just fund it more. And the LITC program is a particular program. It doesn't serve every housing need, not by a long shot, but it's a program that has been successful. And Maria Cantwell and I have been active about trying to look at ways to dramatically expand it, and we'll continue that. But I think right now it's all hands on deck on trying to get through this crisis, the pandemic crisis, which has caused such a housing catastrophe for so many families. And I thank you guys for the work that you're doing in that way. And I look forward to working together with you and drawing on the insights that you're gathering as you're doing great work in Central Virginia.
Well, thank you, Senator. I know you've got a busy day, and we cut off Chris from his presentation to hear from you, but thank you for your comments. Thank you for all the hard work you're doing for us here in the housing sector and for the country for that matter. So have a great day and good luck today. Thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot. Take care, guys. Have a good rest of the session.
Chris, you're up.
All right. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Senator Kaine. I know we have a lot of compelling dialogue to get to, so I'm going to try to be brief in getting through these last few slides. But I left off just talking about some of our strategic objectives, which public housing revitalization and continued support for homeownership, particularly looking at how we can be better partners to help serve our underserved communities and underserved populations. I did want to mention there are a couple of House bills that came out of this session to be aware of. House Bill 810, which has convened a task force to look at the potential to create a state tax credit program. You heard Senator Kaine talking about the low-income housing tax credit program. This would be potentially similar to that, although we've also heard discussion of broadening that to include home ownership. And then House Bill 854, which would be a very expansive look across the Commonwealth at overall gaps and needs for affordable housing, as well as what kind of programs and policies are there currently, and what kind of recommendations are needed to help support efforts around affordable housing moving forward. Some of our priorities, just to make you aware, you heard the senator talk about rent and mortgage relief, and I'll tell you at Virginia Housing, it's been an all hands on deck. Our sister agency, Housing and Community Development, has $50 million in CARES Act that's been funding that's been allocated for this. They are administering a tenant-based program, and we are handling a landlord-based program. So we are full steam ahead on that. Those funds have to be expended by the end of the year. So there's real priority to get that funding out on the street into the areas where it's most needed. And then there's likely going to be an extension of new funding coming down either through Community Development Block Grant Program, State Housing Trust Fund, and as the senator mentioned, possibly another CARES Act bill or COVID relief bill that would continue this program into next year. Also want to mention that we've also stood up an advisory council around minority business. We have several advisory groups that we convene regularly already, everything from rental housing, home ownership, supportive housing. And so this is one of our newer ones to help us get some feedback in terms of how we can better serve some of our underserved populations. And then a big push on innovation. We've created a program to help spur some thought around home ownership and looking at building processes and technology. Jump ahead to just a couple of pictures. We're working in the city of Danville now with this next generation of manufactured housing, which has a pitched roof, carport or garage, drywall throughout. And the really interesting part of that is those homes can be praised using comps for stick built because the quality is so similar. So we see that as a real wealth building opportunity and a way to take advantage of some factory built housing. And speaking of factory built housing, we did our first shipping container home in the city of Richmond last year. We have 2 more that are coming online in the city of Newport News. And actually that picture you can't really see, but those are 3 individual units that have been have come together to form a roughly 1,000 square foot home. So that was sold to a first time home buyer in Richmond. And ultimately we would like to be able to have a manufacturing site here in Virginia. We think that would be a great way to start looking at bringing new product online. And then we're also doing some work around modular housing. Not that modular construction is necessarily innovative, but it's also not something that's being used a lot for kind of our first time home buyer market. So we have a project in Danville where we are constructing 15 single family cottages for sale and 12 townhomes that will also be for sale using a local modular housing manufacturer. And so our hope is to be able to create more of a market. And again, just look for how we can get more product out there to help serve the needs of our residents. And then just I wanted to kind of get in line with the theme of today's thoughts around regional strategies. And what I'd like to say is we've been really excited in the last couple of years to see how there's been more of an enhanced awareness and understanding of how important housing is, and particularly for our local government partners. And really just understanding how housing is fundamental to everything from a person's well-being and health outcomes, education attainment, kind of social mobility and wealth building, quality of life, as well as economic competitiveness. And that seems to really ring true with a lot of our local government partners. I want to pull out a couple of examples where we've really seen local governments take a lead, both in our rural areas and also in our more urban ones. I don't want to steal any of Paul's talking points, but we've certainly seen a great coming together in Northern Virginia where you've had a lot of regional collaboration and goal setting, particularly in support of the Amazon HQ2 initiative. We've seen some local government-led initiatives in Martinsville and Henry County and on the Eastern Shore, where basically they are convening housing summits and saying, we are open for business. They're inviting developers, investors, funders like ourselves to participate in those summits. And again, it's just to build more awareness and to bring more development opportunities into those communities. And we're starting to see those kind of efforts take off. And then I want to point out Middlesex County, which has been something that's really been led by the county as well as the school system, where they recognize there's been a significant need in being able to have more workforce housing, particularly, what they're calling teacher housing. So we have a new project that's coming online that's really kind of at a crossroads in the middle of a rural community. And so you're creating a sense of place there by bringing in new housing as well as some economic and social amenities around a brewery, restaurant, and some other outdoor recreation opportunities. So, we're really excited again about local governments really stepping up and taking the lead and being real partners in a lot of these housing efforts.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, Chris, if you wouldn't mind, are we close to wrapping up your presentation, sir? Because I want to try to get us back on track.
This is my last one. Yep.
Thank you, sir.
I just wanted to give a shout out to all the organizations that are in this region. You are certainly blessed to have a lot of very high performing organizations, and just wanted to call out, several of them who may be represented today. and really just leave with the last one around Chip and his team at the PDC. They've done a great job bringing local governments together, looking at a regional housing study, and we are using that as a model when we go out to other localities. So just want to give kudos to Chip, his team, and all the other organizations that are doing the work there in the region. And with
Chris.
that, I want to thank you.
Chris, thank you so much. And I apologize for having to mix you around a little bit with the senator, but thank you for being so agreeable to adjusting your presentation. Stacy, would you introduce our next panelist?
Absolutely. So the comments from Senator Kane and the presentation by Chris really highlighted the housing issues we're facing today, as well as the importance of really accessing a variety of tools to address the affordable housing challenges. And one of the best ways to do that is to create regional housing strategies to address housing across a wide area. And so our two panelists today are doing just that in their respective areas. And so I do want to say we will have time, try to have time at the end of today's session for question and answers, but please feel free to type your questions into the chat and we will address those when the discussion ends. So Paul and Laura, given your experiences in developing and implementing regional strategies, I feel you're both well placed to highlight some of the issues and challenges that we may be facing here in Charlottesville as we move forward in our regional efforts. But I think it will be helpful to learn a bit more about the issues leading up to your creation of housing strategies for your areas. Laura, can you start us off by providing some background on why a regional housing strategy was created for the Richmond area?
Sure. The Partnership for Housing Affordability has been working in the regional housing space for 16 years. In 2015, we did a study that looked at our housing gap, a gap analysis in terms of how much affordable housing we had versus how many people needed that housing. Households were housing cost burdened, spending more than 30% of their take home their gross income on housing costs. And so we had done that analysis in 2015. We had promised the community we'd come back and look at it in 2020 and redo the numbers. And one of the things we've always stressed is that housing, affordable housing challenges, there's a myriad of them, as you all know, both rental and home ownership. And there's a spectrum of need. But this is a challenge for a region. It's not a challenge for a central city, whether it's Charlottesville or Richmond or DC. It's a challenge for a region. And so although we said we were coming back in 2020, in 2018, Richmond was named the #2 city in the country in terms of its eviction rate. And I'm not sure why, but that got a lot of people upset, as if they were not aware of our housing challenges. It particularly concerned our philanthropic community. And so immediately people were saying, oh, we need a plan, we've got to deal with this. And we'll talk about, I think later, how we kind of developed the strategy around a plan, but we kind of grabbed the urgency, particularly of our philanthropic community. And I basically said, sure, we'll do a plan. We will do a plan if and only if the philanthropic community is generous enough to give us a body to work the plan. And so we took advantage of the urgency of the crisis of being named #2 in the country in evictions and developed a regional housing framework out of that urgency.
Thank you. Paul, I know COG has been working on affordable housing issues for at least the past 20 years, probably longer. But could you give some background on what led up to the creation of your housing strategies?
Sure. Thank you, Stacy. And again, for folks on the panel, I want to say how much of a pleasure it is for me to be seeing Stacy again. I had the pleasure of working with her a number of years ago, earlier in her career at COG. I want to set the table a little bit. COG is a unique organization. We're a regional planning body. We're not a bricks and mortar organization, and we're actually an association. We don't really have any implementation authority. We can't compel our member jurisdictions to do anything, but we can do, we're a forum for best practices for talking about common issues like housing affordability, like homelessness, or COVID, healthcare, and whatnot. And COG's been around since 1957, and housing as a program has been critical to COG for many years. In fact, back in the 70s and 80s, well before my time, there was a lot of HUD 701 money for regional planning that directly and indirectly supported housing efforts. So fast forward, Stacy mentioned it in the 90s. The economy was sort of humming along, and I should back up one thing, and Stacy mentioned it. In that role of what do? We bring together the housing directors, the planning directors. I sit on a committee with the economic development officials locally. Again, it's that convening function, and partnerships really is key to what we do. So in the 90s, we stood up an entity that we called the Washington Area Housing Partnership, specifically to address what we were then starting to see as a housing affordability problem. And it was our member governments, but some of the traditional organizations that you can imagine in this space, Enterprise Community Partners, Fannie Mae Foundation at the time, but also SunTrust and some local philanthropic organizations. And one of the key things that we produced was this report. And I'll send links to Stacy. Stacy's smiling because she remembers it. It was a toolkit for affordable housing development, preservation and production of affordable housing. Nothing groundbreaking, but was something we had never really done to show for this region as a whole. And so we're very proud of that. So fast forward to 2009, 2010, foreclosure crisis hits, and two of our jurisdictions, Prince William County in Virginia and Prince George's County in Maryland, had among the highest rates of housing foreclosure in the country, which is almost hard to imagine now. We worked again, principally with Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, to tee up resources for housing counseling services to help individual homeowners, passing them through to the agencies. Because again, COG is the forum and the conduit, but we're not an actual implementer per se. And it was very successful when we came out the other side. So coming out of that experience, one of the things we learned was, I mentioned the two jurisdictions that were hit very hard, but one of the things we learned is housing markets that were particularly close to transit were almost immune to the foreclosure crisis. And that really dovetails with a lot of the conversations we have about linking land use, transportation, and affordable housing. And so post foreclosure crisis, we saw this escalation of housing affordability as a problem, as an issue. It's fairly steady. And it began to grow as the district reemerged from the financial challenges that it experienced in the 90s and 2000s. DC, the region, we got to be a little bit sexy. We were kind of cool for a while. People actually wanted to be here, with the turnover in presidential administrations and whatnot. And so it became sort of in the forefront, clearly with our housing directors committee, but all the partners that we work with, again, the nonprofits, the advocates, and so forth. And so in addition to having the regular conversations with the housing directors committee, we stood up, and I'm still the co-chair, co-convener, I think is my title, of something we call the Housing Leaders Group of Greater Washington, which is COG, Enterprise, City, the Community Foundation of Greater Washington, Washington Grant Makers, but also some folks that you may have heard of in this space, Michelle Crocker from Navaja, Heather Raspberry from HAND, but more significantly, the Urban Land Institute, and Leadership Greater Washington. We were sort of broadening the tent, if you will. And so we put out a couple more publications. One was this sort of advocacy piece called Call the Question, which really said, will this region collaborate and invest to solve its affordable housing shortage? But another piece, and again, the name they'll be familiar with you, to all of you, Lisa Sturdivant put together this report for us, which again, it's a guidebook for increasing housing affordability in the Greater Washington region. Again, nothing really groundbreaking, but it was a good piece for the community that was starting to become a bit more interested in this topic. And when I say the community, the planning community, to a lesser degree, the development community. And so lastly, where did all this really galvanize? So about 2.5 years ago, we learned we had been shortlisted for the Amazon HQ2 competition. And in fact, 2 years ago, just before the Governor's Housing Conference, it was announced Arlington and Alexandria, the joint submittal that they had proposed, was in fact the winner. But what came out of that conversation was the planners, and the person who was in charge of the site location is in fact a planner, actually was in economic development in Montgomery County in earlier life. They really came to the business community, to all the people who were wrestling with it, and said, y'all really do have a housing affordability problem here. You're not quite to, Boston or New York or some other places, but it's really gotten out of hand, and it's a bit of an Achilles heel here. And so that was the first time we really saw interest beyond sort of the usual suspects of government and philanthropy, where the business community really said, this is something we want to wrap our head around. And I know we have more, we'll get into some of the details before, but one of those entities that leaned in a good bit and that we partnered with is a new organization. COGS, I should have said at the beginning, COG is Northern Virginia, Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax, Loudoun, Prince William, DC, Charles, Frederick, Montgomery, Prince George's counties in Maryland. So we have sort of a funny footprint. There's a new business organization that focused on just this housing issue called the Greater Washington Partnership. Their footprint is Baltimore to Richmond, and it is the top tier of the business community. Ted Leonesis, who owns the Washington Capitals, Russ Ramsey of Friedman Billings Ramsey, Sheila Johnson for BET. It was really, really the top tier elite. And so they paid for some of the research that led to the housing targets in our work that we'll talk about in a minute. So we sort of, my point is, we've been sort of plodding along. We went from housing affordability as a challenge to foreclosure was front and center, to the pendulum swung back. And now housing affordability, we're really, really recognizing is potential an economic development impediment.
Great, thank you. We need to, I think since Charlottesville is getting ready to really go through, we're in the process of creating a strategy now. So Paul, could you give a brief discussion about how everyone worked together, the steps you took to make that strategy happen?
Sure. So we sort of came at it from two directions. One, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail, is what the planning directors did. But one of the things that started this off was we're also a federally designated metropolitan planning organization. Well, what does that mean? Federal transportation dollars go through our board, and we have sort of a carrot and stick that says you have to make wise investments with these dollars. And so you have to link land use and transportation. And I mentioned that before. There's a scenarios work group, for lack of a better way to put it, of elected officials who brought on a consultant, and they said, looking at the jobs that we expect that we're going to get over the next 20 to 25 years, we think there's a housing shortfall in that. You're underestimating, you need an additional 120,000 housing units over and above what you're already expecting. HQ2 really galvanized that conversation. And so the planning director spent most of calendar year 2019, part of 2018, looking at really sort of three things. Do we have the capacity for more housing beyond what we're currently anticipating? And then what are the impediments that are preventing us from producing that housing? And we focus on sort of three things: regulatory impediments, market forces, and then what I call sort of euphemistically community dynamics, which is another word for NIMBYism. The COG board charged us with coming up with a solution. And so September last year, we adopted, based on the work of the planning directors, the housing directors, and a whole host of partners, and I can talk at length about them, targets that by the year 2025, we would add 320,000 total new housing units. 75% of them would be going into what we call activity centers. It's basically transit-oriented development, mixed-use communities, dense areas where you already have the infrastructure to support growth. It's a smart growth construct. And then the kicker was 75% of all of those 320,000 units, 240,000 units by 2025 would be what we would consider affordable. Affordable, I'm doing air quotes, it's sort of up to 120% of AMI. The board adopted it unanimously in September, and we've been working since to try and implement it with our member local governments and all of our strategic partners.
Thank you. Laura, can you talk a little bit about the community engagement processes that you used?
Sure. We really knew that if we wanted a regional housing framework, that's what we call it. We're calling it a framework rather than a plan. So people don't get us confused with the comp plan. So when we wanted to make sure that we weren't just talking to subject matter experts and developers and nonprofit developers, we were talking to people who live the challenge of affordable housing on a daily basis. And so after we raised our funds, we then went out to the community. We went out to the community in several different ways. This is of course pre-COVID, so this is in 2019, the spring of 2019. We went to the community and we did small focus groups. We did regional, we had open meetings in each of the 4 jurisdictions. This plan covers Henrico, Chesterfield, Hanover, and the city of Richmond. We reached out to trusted partners in communities, particularly communities that have been historically marginalized, and made sure that we were partnering with them to do community engagement. And I want to be really clear, we hired community engagement specialists to do this work. We did not attempt to do it ourselves. That's not what we do. So we knew we needed professionals. So we went out in late spring and we into the community and we said, this is what we think are the challenges in terms of housing affordability. Are these the challenges that you all see? Are these challenges that you're experiencing? And we listened, we recorded all of that. We also had an online survey that people could take. We went back to the consultants writing the plan, and we said to the consultant, and the consultants took all that data in. They were working with our team. We had an advisory group of local officials, not elected, but local officials, making sure that we were developing the plan in partnership all along with local government. And once we had crafted solutions, and I think the framework has about 60 different solutions, really running the gamut, not really from homelessness. We have an organization that does very well in that space, but from very low income to home ownership, we run the gamut. We went back out to the community and we said, are these solutions, do they make sense to you? And ran through the same process of community engagement to make sure that we weren't being presumptuous about what we thought were best practices, but what people living the experience of affordable housing challenges would say, that's not going to be of use to me. And even before our summer of, I would call reckoning and awakening that we've experienced this year, we really did our work through the lens of equity. And we wanted to make sure that our solutions would actually increase equitable opportunities in the housing space. And we wanted to test those assumptions with the community. And so in the process, we ended up touching 1,400 folks in the region and making sure that their voices were heard. We received a tremendous grant from National Housing Funders for Housing Opportunity. And we've just started our second year of engagement with again, a professional team. So we launched the plan in January, but we've had a community engagement ongoing with the plan. We have another year where we'll have consultants, and their job is to work on galvanizing community support for the implementation of the plan.
So talking about implementation, and I know you, Laura, your organization is fairly new in that implementation phase, but have you identified any barriers or problems that you've been having since you launched the framework?
Well, COVID's been a bit of a bump in the road and a slowdown. I will say that we were extraordinarily fortunate to already have broad-based support for the work that we're doing. You know, I have to tip my hat to Chris Thompson and Susan Dewey and all the folks at VHDA, Virginia Housing, because when we went out to secure funding, a grant from VHDA at the time, we needed the endorsement of all 4 of our local governments to receive that grant funding. We already had, because we had the partnership in place, we already had those trusting relationships. And I really think it is these long-standing, trusting relationships with our local government partners, our private sector, nonprofit, and philanthropic, and even our academic partners. I see Fabrizio on, and we've had strong partners with Virginia Commonwealth University, Virginia Tech, and others. It's those long-standing relationships that have allowed us to overcome, I think, some bumps in the road. I mean, I think, you know, a natural barrier in this work is, as Paul mentioned, NIMBYism. That's always a challenge. Funding is always a challenge. I know that we're looking at a state LIHTC program, and that would be a huge shot in the arm. We need more funding mechanisms, more innovative funding mechanisms. So I think that's a barrier that we, you know, we just know, you do this work, you know that's going to be the case. But we also had to pivot. We were one of the solutions, and the framework was a regional regional home ownership center. And that was particularly exciting to our local governments, particularly our suburban government officials. Well, when COVID hit, we said, you know what? We don't need a regional home ownership opportunity center right now. What we need is we need to stand up very quickly a housing resource line, staff that. And when people call in for rental assistance, which is what people are calling in about right now, we'll be prepared to address that situation. And so we've raised a lot of money, and we stood up this housing resource line. We have 70 referral partners, and they are doing the work of making sure that people in Richmond stay stably housed during this time. My point is, we could have seen that as a barrier, but we saw it as an opportunity. And whatever framework or plan that you all create in Central Virginia, Charlottesville region, I would say make sure that you have a mindset of agility and flexibility, because what you think is a problem one day might not be the challenge you need to address 6 months, a year, or 2 years hence.
Thank you. Paul, I know that COG is in the, well, you have some unique challenges when it comes to implementing regional policies. I realize COG is not the one that does the implementation, you coordinate that. So how were you able to secure agreement from 24 different local governments across 2 states in the District of Columbia to get on board?
So we have a really big room, and we lock everybody inside, and then no one gets to go home until, no. It is a good question. So again, that really is our role. I mean, my boss likes to talk about, we have 1,000, 1,500 people on a month, well, used to on a monthly basis go in and out of our doors. So we have conversation across the gamut of things, including affordable housing. And so we like to be able to lead in and say, look, we're having that conversation over here. Don't you want to be a part of it, or can we be a part of it in your world? I mean, I think for us, first and foremost, it's our members. As you said, I work for all the local governments plus the state delegation, congressional delegation, and whatnot. We've got some pretty enlightened elected officials, and particularly when it came to setting the housing targets, they wanted to lean in more than what we had suggested. So again, I mentioned our activity centers as the construct where we want growth to occur. And it was the elected officials who said, yeah, we need to do more than just half of our residential growth there. And so we had said maybe 2/3. They leaned in and said, we want to commit ourselves to putting 75%, 3/4 of all the net new housing growth in these priority places. So that was, of their own volition. A lot of its partners, as I said, we have been fortunate in some of the traditional organizations. The Urban Land Institute is a tremendous partner, but they also sort of threw us a little bit of a curve because I talked about the three impediments in that they produced a nice glossy report that really talked about how, well, housing production's really held up because of government red tape. I'm being a little bit flippant when I say that, but that really was part of their message. And the good news is they are part of our conversations. And so we work back and forth on their housing panels, their development side, to try and actually target specific projects, identify different resources. The creative funding. Some of you I know my good friend David Bowers from Enterprise Community Partners, one of the most passionate people when it comes to housing affordability. He went through pretty big personal challenges in the last couple of years and losing a number of people in his family. And it caused him to very passionately say a year and a half ago, we want to throw down a marker for a $1 billion housing challenge, meaning we want this region, all these partners, to commit to coming up with $1 billion of previously untapped, unidentified capital towards new housing, preservation and production, and so forth. So it really is, number one, it really is political will. It's our enlightened leadership wanting to lean in and do things. It's having the right people at the table. But I will say, and Laura said at the beginning, COVID is, it really is. It's the question, is it the next 6 months, next 6 years? It's truly, it's an academic question. And there's other challenges that we face. So we haven't solved the crisis, the challenge by any means yet.
So we are coming up to 1 o'clock. I want to be sensitive to everyone's time that has joined us today. But Paul and Laura, do you have any last minute pieces of advice or comments you would like to end with?
Well, I really will re-emphasize that if at all possible, if you're going to write a regional housing plan, that you do commit to having someone who owns that, who gets up every day and it's their job to work the plan. I'm sure everyone on this call has been part of strategic planning plans that just sit on the shelf. And so having the money up front to be able to hire talent, to work in partnership with local governments and the affordable housing development community to move forward and make progress. Also, too, I would say that our plan is at harva.org. It's there because we want it to be a living, breathing document. We want it to be agile. We want to be able to adjust. And we have a commitment to annually measure our progress. So everyone, the local governments and others, are going to be held accountable or have volunteered to be held accountable for whether or not we're making progress on various solutions. And I think accountability and getting buy-in up front that we're going to jointly hold each other accountable is really important.
So I'm going to wrap it up, guys. So I just wanted to take a minute and thank everybody for their time, particularly Chris. I apologize. I had to interrupt you twice, but he did a great job. Looks like he jumped off on pulling in. Laura and Paul, thank you for being here and sharing some knowledge. And so just a quick couple of reminders here. The next session is on November 12th. And what we're going to be doing is the Regional Housing Partnership is going to be releasing our new website, which I'm super excited about. This particular website is going to be a kind of a housing locator and service. It's a little bit of a tease. You guys got to come back on the 21st. It's going to be the 12th. That was my dyslexia. The 12th to go ahead and learn a little bit more about it. I put something in the feed a little bit later here today or tomorrow. You're going to receive an email with a survey. Please fill it out. It helps us get better at what we do and helps us get better at trying to bring some subjects to you guys in the future. So it's 1 o'clock. I want to say thank you for everybody. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day and go out there and enjoy the sunshine. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Stacy.
Yep, thanks, Stacy, Laura. Great to see
Thank you.
both
Yeah,
again.
take care.
Absolutely. Thank you both very much.
Happy to. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.